was a governor for the whole 6 years at AmCham. So I came to Hong Kong in the late 70s, and in 1980 I started my own company, ICS Trust. And I dealt with medium-sized companies from all over the world that were coming to Asia to use Hong Kong as a jumping-off point for going into China and actually all around the world. And in 2012, I sold the company. And then I started the Amber Foundation, which is our family's charitable foundation. And we have two major projects. One is an environmental project where we collect airline kits and hotel toiletries, and we redistribute those to about 35 charities in Hong Kong. The other one is more recent. It's a 6-year-old project called Empower by the Amber Foundation. And we support ethnic minority young women in university to make them more visible to future employers so that they will have career success. A subset of this program is that we hope by finding great careers for these young women that they will take their families out of poverty because they come from families that are extremely impoverished. I think it had an enormous impact. I think when you're an entrepreneur and you do something like many people, many women do in Hong Kong, which is start a company with an idea on your dining room table with no resources, no funding, no support of any kind, that when you get to the point where you're recognized by an illustrious chamber like AmCham for being the Woman Entrepreneur of the Year, that is a very validating experience. And I know that many people, after I won that award, referred to it. They said, "Oh, I heard that you won the Woman Entrepreneur of the Year award." And, so I think when you work very hard as an entrepreneur to get to a certain point, when you have a situation where people are saying to you, "We recognize you," where a group of women in this case have looked at everything you've done and said, "Good job," then you start to say to yourself, "Hey, I haven't done so badly," and it makes one very proud. There's no doubt about that. When I went to law school, which was at McGill in Montreal, I was one of the very few women in the class. I can hardly remember any other women. I can just remember being in this sea of men everywhere. Every one of them wanted to be a corporate lawyer. They wanted to do international work. They wanted to do this. But there was very little talk of social responsibility or trying to help the underprivileged. I remember that it was quite a challenge to constantly be in rooms with just men in them. I finished 2 law degrees at McGill, and then I went to Article to do an internship, as it were. Everybody in the courts, everybody in the law firms were all men, and the only women were secretaries. So I had no role models. I didn't have anybody that I could look up to or say, this is how I should do it, or this is how I should present myself, or whatever. So it was a very lonely journey. And then when I moved into banking in my first job in Hong Kong, it was the same. It was all men. And the women were either clerical staff or they were secretaries. I think that starts to make you very aware of the position of women in the world and what needs to happen. And I think in terms of how I was brought up in our family, we were always taught to think about other people and to think about the welfare of people. And a lot of the subjects which we now take for granted as lawyers or in any profession, just weren't talked about back in those days. And so I think that's really where it started. And when I got here, I started working on several women's issues. There was a very strong group of women here that came from all kinds of walks of life. It was an amazing group. And one of the things we found was in the Inland Revenue Ordinance that it said that married women were considered chattels of their husbands. And so we worked on that for probably 2 years to get the law changed. And I think that was the first thing that I did that was really I guess, a feminist act in terms of doing that kind of thing. The biggest challenge really comes from my work with ethnically diverse young women. You know, what we've seen recently in Hong Kong is, and actually it's worldwide. I've just come back from Canada and I've seen the same thing there. There aren't enough workers. And yet here we have something like 8% of the population who are starting to go to university, the first in their families to go. They have the opportunity to work, to contribute. The majority of them are native English speakers, which Hong Kong needs extremely badly. And yet the employers are not looking at them. They're not giving them a chance. They're not going out and seeking them. And these young women in turn are not meeting the employers. And that to me is a real challenge, because women in business in Hong Kong have achieved a great deal. Primarily because of household help, women in Hong Kong have a lot more freedom than the women do in Canada or the US. I remember speaking at a conference for lawyers in Canada one year, many years ago. And afterwards they had this lovely round table and dinner. And all the women were talking about having to rush home and put on the dinner or put on the dishwasher. You know, we're so fortunate here that we don't have to do that kind of thing. So I think that generally women who are in big companies and have a lot of benefits and have household help, they're very fortunate. But now it's our time to really look at those underprivileged, non-visible parts of Hong Kong. They're still coming. They're coming into Hong Kong all the time, whether they're coming from China, whether they're coming from Pakistan. So the employers here really have to look, and they have to recognize this is an untapped resource that they need. And they have to start recognizing that, and hopefully through our Empower program, which is just going into its 6th year, we're making some difference there and starting to bring groups together in some networks. So it's a new era, and hopefully there'll be changes. And hopefully because of these programs, it'll take some of these families that are so impoverished in a rich city like Hong Kong, it'll take them out of poverty. And if that happens, and really education is the way out of poverty, then this will be a benefit for everyone in Hong Kong. It'll be really turning a new leaf and being aware of this untapped resource of employees. And for some reason, the employers have these blinkers on. They pay money for people to work in what's called diversity and inclusion. I've yet to really figure out where the diversity is, but I know there isn't the inclusion. And this is something that I think groups like the American Chamber and all the other chambers, we have to start looking at. We can't ignore this. We can't just deal with the cream of the crop and the top largest companies. We have to look at everybody and include everybody. I'd like to just talk a little bit about what entrepreneurship does for women. I was thinking about this before I came here, and I was more or less forced into entrepreneurship. I spent a long time training as a lawyer, and I ended up in a situation where I almost had no choice but to start my own company to help clients of this bank I worked for that went bankrupt in like fireworks in a massive way, and so I had to stay on to help these people. But you know, I became a very devoted entrepreneur and went on to found the Women Business Owners Club, the Women Entrepreneurs Network. I started the Entrepreneur Committee at AmCham and then at CanCham. And I realized that, especially for women, it gives you so much freedom. You know, it's kind of like a yin and yang thing because you work like a dog, there's no doubt about it, but it gives you the freedom to decide I'm working Sunday, but I'm not working Friday. And for me, as I got to the point where I actually had people who were working with me and had some staff, and when I eventually had children, it meant going to something at the school wasn't a problem. And I remember one of my employees coming to me and saying, could I have the day off on Monday? And I said, do you mind me asking why? And she said, My daughter has, I said, stop. We're a family-oriented company, you just go. But now you see that companies will say, oh, we give this day and that day and that day. But in the older days, people weren't so willing to give these days. And I think entrepreneurship and the women that I've seen in Hong Kong, I mean, this is an incredible place still for entrepreneurship. And I've seen them scale up their businesses, sell their businesses, and really put money in their pocket. Really achieve financial security. And I think that's an amazing thing that we can't forget in a place like Hong Kong. It's still so easy to set up a business. The tax rate is incredibly attractive. And I think we should just keep encouraging women, and probably men too, to go into business. But I think for women, entrepreneurship really provides the best of both worlds and really gives yourself that life-work balance that a lot of women that we see that are going up the ladder saying, I've had it. You know, one woman told me that she worked for a company where they never thought about the time zone, and so they would ask her to come to meetings at 4 o'clock in the morning, and she did it. And finally she said, that's enough, I've had it. She went out and set up her own business. And I see that story being repeated all the time. We have 20 years of history of women entrepreneurs winning this award, and they are incredible role models for other women entrepreneurs in Hong Kong.